So audience, we have our next panel, Power, Politics and the Battle for Markets, where we will be discussing EU-India trade agreement and its geopolitical significance, rise of regional trade corridors and economic alliances, and which regions gain or lose influence in the new trade order. For which I have the speakers Alexander Simasko, Director, Department for International Trade and Cooperation, Ministry of Economic Development; Ovesh Sarmad, Vice Chair, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Committee, former Deputy Executive Secretary of United Nations Climate Change; Amir Ibrahim, Chief Sustainable Investment Officer, Hammerschlag Private; and Suresh Yadav, Senior Director of the Trade, Ocean and Natural Resources Directorate, Commonwealth Secretariat. And to moderate, we have Dr. Anuj Nandi, Political Scientist, Dusher, Bundestag.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for my throat. Just it had to happen today only when I have the session. I hope I'm loud and clear to everyone. Well, my name is Dr. Anuj Nandi. I'm from German Bundestag. I work as a political scientist. And today I welcome you all at the Global Business Summit at New Delhi, India. So I'm honored to moderate this session today, and I have really good and distinguished guests from all around the world. So I think I would start. Please forgive me if I mispronounce your name or do not pronounce it correctly. I'll try my best. Right, so I have Mr. Alexander Siemiesko. Welcome, sir. Thank you very much. I'm very close to Poland, so. And then we have Mr. Marcin Piotrowski. Mr. Marcin is not here today. All right. So then we have Mr. Ovesh Sarmat. Then we have Mr. Rajiv Kannan. Wow. Okay. Yeah. And then we have Mr. Amir Ibrahim and Mr. Suresh Yadav. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us today here. So I would like to start with the global trade today is no longer defined purely by markets or tariffs. It is increasingly shaped by geopolitics, climate priorities, supply chain resilience, and strategic corridors linking regions such as Europe, India, and the Middle East. This panel explores how governments, businesses, and global institutions are redesigning economic alliances, and what does that mean for the emerging global trade order. So I would like to start with Mr. Alexander with a very good background from policy and government. I think the question which I have prepared for you is, as global trade increasingly shift toward regional alliances and strategic blocs, how is Europe repositioning itself, and where does India fit within Europe's long-term trade and security partnerships? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here on this wonderful conference. Lots of very interesting voices, and I hope I'll be able to contribute my small part. And I think this panel is very much on point, because what we have been seeing for a number of years now is a fundamental shift in how the world operates. And it has not started yesterday. It has not started a year ago. It has started, at the very latest in 2020, when we have started moving from an efficiency paradigm to a more security focused one. And security is not efficient. Security requires redundancies. Security requires the ability to prioritize strategy over short-term gains. And this trend was exacerbated in 2022 with the illegal war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. It was further exacerbated when we've seen the number of trade disputes emerging in the last few years, whether we talk about tariffs, global overcapacity, or the juncture between security, information sovereignty, and trade when it comes to digital, information sphere, app access. And this is a new world for Europe. Europe was built both as a peace project, but also one in which the economic interdependence was aimed at ensuring that said peace. So we are redefining ourselves, and I think despite all the gloom talk, Europe is quite well positioned to do that for at least 2 or 3 reasons. First one being we know how to do trade. We've been doing trade for a number of years, and obviously while Europe has a vested interest in maintaining a well-functioning WTO system, one which we helped to build, we also have a vast network of FTAs, with the latest one being obviously the mother of all trade deals, the one with India. And I can get back to that later, but this is the network that we have means that over 50% of EU's trade goes outside the WTO system, but rather is conducted through FTAs and other arrangements. Secondly, while we do not possess the raw manufacturing output of China or the capacity of the United States to ensure the security of global commons through military means or others, Europe has something that I think is in high demand in this day and age. That is stability, predictability, and transparency. And that means that, for instance, when it comes to Europe-India's partnership, not only has it been elevated to strategic level, not only it has been enhanced with trade agreement, but we've also signed a security and defense partnership, but we've also signed a number of sectoral agreements, and that means that we are in the midst of the like-minded groupings of countries or other organizations that have a vested interest in the maximum stability and predictability of the global world order that is transforming, that is shifting as we can see, but needs to be based on a number of basic principles. And we will see this increasing shift. So it's this regional, like-minded, friendshoring, the number of names that have been used to describe this phenomenon. But we will see this enhanced cooperation going further and further, precisely because the world around is becoming less safe, less predictable, and less welcome to globalization of yesterday.
Thank you very much. That was a very good view from the policy and prospective side. Just to add on it quickly, I would like to know that, do you see EU and India cooperation becoming a constant stone of Europe's Indo-Pacific trade strategy?
Well, it's certainly one of the building blocks. It's certainly one of the main pillars. Obviously, we have a network of FTAs already in place, functioning for over a decade with South Korea, with Japan. We are negotiating with Vietnam, with Singapore. We are negotiating once with, concluded negotiations with Indonesia, negotiating one with Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Australia. So it's less of a cornerstone, but one of the main pillars. India, by its sheer size, but also by its unrivaled dynamism and growth perspectives. In 5 years, or perhaps even less, India will be the third largest economy in the world. By some measures, much, much sooner. So India is a special pillar. But if we were to center our strategy just around India, that would mean that, and I'm using just in quotation marks, but that would mean that we focus on the Indian Mediterranean corridor, on the South Asian strategy. No, I think it's more of a shift towards Indo-Pacific as a region as a whole, and I think that makes EU more attractive to India as a partner. It's not just bilateral. It should be viewed in a wider context, and the same goes for India policy. I mean, India has concluded deals with the UK, with EFTA countries, so this cross-regional interest is mutual and goes beyond pure bilateralism. And obviously, we'll see where the agreement goes. There are still some things to be perhaps build upon its foundations. We still lack the investment part, it's the trade deal, but this is a deal that should not be underestimated, that links India's amazing prospects and India's extraordinary internal market to the largest trade bloc in the world. And we'd be foolish not to let this agreement go a waste.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, absolutely. So we can talk about, because it's just a start. I would say that recently we have the visit from the German Chancellor to India and the European President, Ms. von der, talking about the free trade, which is, I think, being said that it's been, benefiting either way. I mean, both ways, to India as well as to Europe. Thank you very much for that. So moving on to the next question, I would have next to me Mr. Owais Sarmat. I have this question for you, sir. Climate regulations are increasingly influencing trade partnerships and supply chains. How are sustainability standards reshaping global trade alliances, particularly for rapidly growing economies such as India?
Great question, and thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers for hosting this event, inviting us, and for this session in particular. Pleasure to be here with other panelists. I wish there were some women on the panel as well, because coming from the UN background, I have to say that's not good. Given my background in the United Nations, and the last leg was with the Climate Change Secretariat, the UNFCCC Paris Agreement, and indeed, climate change is an existential issue facing all of us. And I was encouraged to hear in the panels and the discussion about sustainability, but not enough about the threat that climate change is posing to companies, to corporations, to countries, regions around the world. And I sometimes feel like maybe humanity is walking right into it with a blindfold, similar to what happened with COVID. And COVID might seem just a small issue in relation to what might happen with climate change. We have already crossed the 1.5 degree limit, which is the safe limit of global warming. So I think it's very, very important. So climate change and managing it and preventing the harmful impacts will become, or have already become, integral to trade relations. And I'm sure with all the trade agreements that have been discussed and finalized in the recent past, especially with India, that is a central point, that sustainability has to be an integral part of trade, addressing climate change, making sure that we limit the greenhouse gas emissions and remain within the Paris Agreement limit of 1.5 degrees. So that is going to be critical, and I'm sure you all heard about CBAM of the European Union. So more and more we will see countries requiring corporations and countries to comply with greenhouse gas emission limitations and reversal of that in their trade agreements or implementation of those agreements. So I see that a big writing on the wall, and we all need to be prepared for it.
Thank you very much. That's a crucial sustainability angle to trade discussions. Just to come back to that, do you think that the green trade regulations risk creating new trade barriers, especially for emerging markets?
I don't believe so. I think they are actually huge opportunities. In fact, making sure that our exports and goods and services are complying with green regulations are actually a good thing. And because by not doing that, the tendency would be, or the risk would be, those products and services becoming like Nokias or Kodaks of the future. Because the writing is clearly on the wall that consumers and all the large markets will require that their goods and services are carbon neutral or even carbon negative, because we have entered a stage where we need to think about reversing rather than becoming just neutral. So absolutely critical going forward, especially for a country like India.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I would go back to, I'm sorry, I just have with the name problem. So I would go back to Mr. Alexander, would be nice, right? Easy to pronounce. So just the same question. I mean, would you be agree with the with Mr. Osei?
Yes. No, but in a slightly longer answer. I think it's important to understand that there's a number of exceptions to the general, most favored nation principles in trade policy, and climate, green policies are one of them. It's not green protectionism, quote unquote. These are measures that are also mirrored by domestic withdrawal of free emissions policies. So on one hand, it is a bit of a level playing field issue, but on the other hand, we are living in a world that will, first of all, increasingly will not stop climate change, but we have to manage the climate change as it will go, and it will incur unfathomable costs on governments, businesses, and individuals alike. So whatever we can do, and there's some worlds of difference between 1.5 and 2, and more than 2 degrees thresholds. So whatever we can do, even though we are falling behind what has been agreed and projected by the UN scientists, we have to go forward. And obviously, for a number of countries, a number of economies, India and EU being one of those, we're not abundant in oil and gas of our own. We are input dependent. Right. Europe has learned the hard lesson of being overly dependent on an unreliable supplier, and we had to shift quickly, and that amounted to significant costs. And obviously there are a number of questions when it comes to supply chain security and affordability, when it comes to shift to renewables. There's a whole discussion about critical rare earth minerals that has to be done. But we need to understand that climate policies, if done in a reasonable way, in a just way, that do not expose us the most vulnerable countries, but also the most vulnerable people and businesses in our own societies, can enhance not only the global commons, but also our climate security and economic security in the end. So it has to be done in a responsible way, but doing nothing could be extremely irresponsible in the end.
Well, thank you very much. That being said, I would start to have a question with Mr. Suresh Yadav here. So, Mr. Yadav, so the regional trade blocs are expanding globally. Do they create new growth opportunities for emerging economies like India, or do they risk accelerating global economy fragmentations?
So thank you very much for this question, Mr. Moderator. Just to say that, thank you for choosing this very intersectional topic where you are talking about power, trade blocs, politics, market, all combined together. The only element missing, which is so contractual, is AI and digital technologies, because actually, apart from the power, AI, the other one which is driving many of the things around the world. If you look at the politics, that is also happening primarily to take the dominance over the AI. If you look at the current superpower and the superpower knocking the door to be the superpower are basically trying for the market, and the market could be primarily for AI market, right? So in that context, if you look, global economy around $120 trillion, European Union around $20 trillion, India around $5 trillion. So if you put these numbers together, then you get the shape and size of the market. Also, you get the shape and size of the directions of the new block. If you look at the IMEC block, or if you look at as he was pointing about, India and EU corridor, that combines 5 plus 20, it becomes 25 trillion. If you look China, 20 trillion. If you look US, 30 trillion. So in this entire number game, where do you make those numbers look bigger and better? So that's one aspect which countries are trying to put into their entire global negotiation, bilateral, multilateral strategies, and that's where you will see the new direction. You look at the expansion of the BRICS, right? The BRICS started when I was with the Finance Minister of India in G20, only 4 countries started. South Africa added. Now more and more countries are being added up. So many more new blocks are coming up to capitalize, to regroup. So the world started with bipolar, multipolar. Now many poles are being created. You don't know every day the way AI is shaping the agenda. The countries are also, the politics around that is also going faster. So the only thing which is competing with the AI is the geopolitics, which is going much faster. Every day, new block, new relationship, old relationship being dismantled. So to your question, I think the new corridors, new blocks are creating more opportunities. You are diversifying your risk. You are not looking your relationship to a country which is the superpower of the today. And also you are not looking your relationship primarily from a lens of a country who wants to be the superpower of tomorrow. Every country wants to protect its sovereign interest, and that's how they are aligning their relationship, their bilateral economic investment and trade corridors in $120 trillion global market. I hope it answers your questions.
Absolutely, it does. Thank you very much. Well, going back to your point with the BRICS, I think US would happily not be agree with that when the other countries are joining in. And also, we're not missing the AI part here. I think, well, my next session is also about the AI, so I think we're going to pretty much cover that up also later this afternoon. So just getting back to you again, sir, what role do you see India playing as bridge economy and between developed and developing trade systems?
So traditionally, India has always been the leader of the global south. I mean, I have worked in the government for a very long time with the finance minister, with the president of India. I was a representative of the India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka in the World Bank, now in the Commonwealth. So traditionally, whether I have been in the government or outside the government, India has always been the voice for the global south, bringing the voice of the LDCs, developing countries, small island state on a global stage. And even in the vaccine period, if you look back, any country which supplied vaccine on the demand, so the countries which world would have never thought of with the population of 30,000, 40,000, 100,000. India was the one which was able to supply when others were asking for airport or mines and others to give that vaccine. So India will continue to play that voice, particularly in a very fragmented way. And also when the technology is dominating, and the dominance comes from the power which has been developing the solutions for solving the problems, which are the closed-end solutions. If you look at the Silicon Valley model, you develop a closed-end solutions, you license the country, and you make them dependent on you forever. It's like lifelong dependent by a country or the individuals on that technological solutions. But if you look at the Indian solutions and Indian policies, I'm not saying because I'm an Indian, but I'm also saying as a global policy expert who has been around for 10 years or more, India has always gone for the open source. Like look at the DPI, which India and Brazil are doing. So that is a model where you are the master. You are not the servant of the technology. You are the master of the technology. You are the master of the platform on the basis of which you are able to further innovate and develop the solution. So even in the present world, whether it's the AI-driven solution, whether it's the trade-driven solutions, I think India has a very important role to play. I mean, G20 is, of course, also in a very difficult and challenging situation, but there are many more new blocks coming up, and there are many more, what should I say, unexploited, not so-called trade blocks, but so-called grouping of the nations, like the organization which now I work, the Commonwealth Secretariat, which is around $14 trillion economy block with 56 countries, 2.6 billion people. If you trade within the countries, it's 21% cheaper because of the same rule, same governance system, same understanding of all those things. So all those organizations who were not so as a bloc are emerging as a favorite bloc in the new emerging world order, and that's where I see country India and a strong leadership will have a very, very important role to play in shaping the direction of the world as we move along in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that for sure highlighting the development and global growth perspective. Going back to the first that we had, Mr. Ibrahim. So I have a question for you, sir, that as the geopolitical tensions reshape global supply chains, are multinational corporations increasingly viewing India as a preferred investment and manufacturing destination?
Well, hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to hear commentary from my fellow panelists. I think one of the things that I would start off by saying is that geopolitical risk is certainly, like, as an investor, something that is always considered. You know, it's something that is considered at the very local level, and of course, when you're looking at macro trade flows, you know, on a bilateral or multilateral basis, supply chains are very complex. What I would say, to caveat the question slightly, is that India, you know, we see tremendous tailwinds here, and I think that's something that, you know, data largely is supporting across many sectors in relation to capital investment, in relation to expansion of market presence here within the country. The drivers of that are not purely geopolitical risk. It is also looking at other tailwinds that support this, particularly looking at demographic trends, looking at the knowledge base here, a very highly educated workforce, and looking at access to the market is something that I would say global investors see as very positive points of reference. Certainly in relation to geopolitical challenges, particularly as we're seeing in a post-COVID world, nearshoring becoming more common practice. So whether that's within North America, we've seen trends around that. We've seen it within Europe. I think that many countries have sought to diversify supply chains, particularly due to the bottlenecks that became very apparent during the pandemic. And, you know, this is something that actually is beneficial, you know, for efficiency. You know, it's not something that I think that the way that the narrative presents it is often related to politicization, but also when you're looking at these bottlenecks, and particularly when, you know, things like vaccines or medical supplies are concerned, this is something that countries cannot not address vulnerabilities within, you know, the existing global frameworks. But certainly, India is becoming an increasingly attractive destination for investment and development. I think that the elephant in the room is often the US-China relationship, and particularly the dependency in relation to trade that has, particularly since China's entry into the WTO in the early 2000s, been something that has seen extended growth until the last few years. What I would say is that obviously some of the more noticeable announcements, whether it's Apple increasing its operations here or other multinationals, that could be partly related to obviously some of the geopolitical risks that obviously have been identified, particularly as the United States, as the, you know, world's largest consumer market is concerned, seeks to diversify some of its chains. India, I think, will be a beneficiary of some of that. But I think looking at only through the lens of geopolitical risk would not present the full story. And as I say, the other tailwinds in relation to capabilities, increased industrialization within the country, and as we've seen in recent years under the current government, increasingly favorable regulation and also attractiveness for international investors to allocate capital here is something that has also been supported through public policy in recent years. I think you mentioned obviously the FTA that has been agreed with the European Union, but also to actually, there's many initiatives to also attract not only on the supranational or even bilateral basis, but to actually attract private individual investors, whether those are individual institutions, high net worth individuals, or others that are seeking to allocate capital. I think this government has really done a tremendous amount of work to actually bring some of that FDI into the country.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim, and thank you for bringing the corporate and the investment reality. And just to add on to that question, how are corporations balancing geopolitical risk with long-term growth opportunities in Asia in particular?
I think a term that I came across a couple of years ago, and something that I think is very indicative, of how decision making will be analyzed in the coming years, is a term that references your demographic futures, your economic future. And I think fundamentally, if you look at Asia, if you look at India, and if you look at other countries within the continent, there are tremendous tailwinds to actually support that. We do a lot of investments within the GCC, specifically Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, as an example, has a population where 75% of people are under 35 years old. And when you think about that, and when you think about the demographics in this country, the number of young people, the energy, the opportunities to actually look at advancing innovation around education for the next generation, as we move into this world where I think every single day now you cannot read or watch a piece of news without hearing the terms AI. Actually, interestingly, my initials are AI, but that's by complete coincidence. But as we're moving into this new world, it will not only be a requirement to look at how companies and government officials change policy to support, obviously, the new workforce that exists. Upskilling will be a requirement, and actually many of the young people that are growing up digitally literate, I think we will start to see reverse education almost taking place, because many of these young people have grown up with a very natural literacy in using technologies that potentially others from older generations were not given exposure to until later points in life. So I think there will be tremendous shifts. I think that looking at India specifically, particularly with the very mature IT industry that exists here, I think this country is going to benefit hugely from the advent of obviously looking at this very digitized world. You have millions of people in this country that are actually practitioners within this space, and looking at the opportunities there for innovation, I think that we will see tremendous economic growth developed from that. But of course, this is a global phenomenon. So, the importance of countries working together through this and not working in silos. And, one of the things I think we obviously hope is that collaboration will take place to ensure widespread prosperity, something that's very important. And obviously looking at industrialization, from the past. I come from Scotland, and Scotland is a small country, a very small, we're only 5.4 million people, which is smaller than New Delhi by certainly population size. But Scotland, despite its size, was actually, people reference the UK, but actually Scotland actually was the heart of much of the Industrial Revolution that took place during the 17th and 18th century. But of course, we have to learn through history, and there were many mistakes that were actually made, partly in relation to how knowledge transfer was distributed abroad, but also if you look at post-industrialization in Scotland and the UK went through a long period of economic decline. And that was partly because of complacency. But I think that we have to ensure that any future, whether we call this the fourth industrial revolution or whatever it may be, the same mistakes are not repeated from the past. And that, particularly looking at AI, this is not something that one country will have ownership of. This is something that really does require universal collaboration. And particularly, even looking at the United States and China, where the highest levels of investment currently are still being developed, not one country on its own will have ownership of this, and I think that no region will have either. So I think for countries like India, particularly with its very vast talent pool in this area, looking at those collaboration opportunities with other countries will be incredibly important.
Thank you very much. I think we don't have time, but we started late, so we do have time. So I would like to ask Mr. Yadav if you would like to follow up onto that, or just to add on to something, because we're talking about Asia here. Would you like to follow up to Mr. Ibrahim, what he just said?
Thank you very much. I fully agree with him. And Asia has always been, and even it's going to be very important and crucial. And as I said that uh, post-COVID, there was one country plus one strategy for risk diversification. That was the agenda, and some of the countries were giving incentives and subsidies to relocate the manufacturing supply. But now it is not C plus one, it is C plus many. So that is the new strategy which has emerged in the global value chain, and the risk diversification strategies of the countries and of the companies. And on the top of it, if you combine together the boom revolution around the AI and how the countries wants to place themselves into that chain, not only becoming just a consumer, but being the part of the evolution revolution, where they can create their own solutions in the product and making others, because it's not the compute power which is the AI, but it is the data which is the kind of an engine, or you can say kind of a fuel for the compute power. And that's where the big economies, the big populous countries like India or Bangladesh or other countries will have a huge role to play, because they are the one who are generating a lot of data. Without data, a lot of these LLMs and AI will die. So that is another angle which will come, and that's where I see Asia will have a very dominant and powerful things to come forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yadav, for highlighting the Asian point. So quickly, I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions for our great panelists here. Yes, please.
I have one question. It's for Alexander. The first one is, do you anticipate any China pushback post the closing of ties between EU and India in the Indo-Pacific? And if yes, what would be the probable reactions you are anticipating?
Also, if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Sure. I'm Sanskriti, and I work as in a managerial position for corporate strategy in WSP Canada. It's a Canadian MNC.
Well, thank you. I think it's a very good question, and after you introduce yourself, I understand the background that stems with the question. I think China, from European, from Polish point of view, is an indispensable partner. We are so globally intertwined in value chains that it's an essential partner. But it's no secret that the number of policy differences when it comes to trade, industry, overcapacity, geopolitical differences, and we have to be able to discuss them as mature adults. And there might be a sentiment why India, why there's no EU-China FTA. There are some works on the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, done in the past. I think both parties, the EU and China, took different paths in the end. China with dual circulation strategy, with Made in China 2025, then updated. And I think that every policy choice has its consequences. But no FTA should be viewed as being done against anybody. In the end, the hard truth about global trade is that even those who do not participate directly, unless they exclude themselves or excluded by force, they profit from it. If global GDP grows, and we know that if trade grows, global GDP grows, China will find more markets to export to bring investments from into China. And if India and Europe grow richer, but because of this FTA, in the long run, it's beneficial from China. And I think if diversification of global value chains happens, and more, cooperation between India and China, India and the EU is being done, well, that might actually help to lower the temperature of some differences that we might have. So again, I think a partnership benefits if both parties seem more independent on each other and are better able to articulate their interests. In the long run, it is beneficial, even if in the short run that leads to some tensions. And I hope that answers the question in one way or another.
Yes. The next question from Mr. OS. The question is, what mechanism is the Division of UN Climate Change is looking at, or let's say is exploring, based on the recent pushbacks that we have received from US on the stance of climate change overall, as well as the funding cuts that have come to?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So the reality is what we know, United States is pulled back from the Paris Agreement, and not only from the Paris Agreement, but from the convention, the UNFCCC, which is quite remarkable in terms of why they have done that. So the response is in the United Nations and the Climate Change Secretariat is that we need to continue to hold to the scientific evidence, which is unequivocally clear. There are 2,000 scientists who come together under the IPCC to provide that scientific evidence about what's happening with climate change and what we need to do about it. So there will be geopolitical dips and shifts, shocks along the way, but we need to stick to the evidence, the scientific facts that are glaring truth. So the strategy is that requiring all other countries, especially the emerging economies, India, China, Brazil, and others, to leapfrog, to do more, to showcase, to bring the interdependency, interconnectivity in their trade relations, in their geopolitical aspirations, to dampen the impact of what has recently happened, and we hope that will not last long, as it usually happens, but these shocks do come to pass. But we need to remain true to the scientific evidence and facts that we all know are there glaring at us.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we won't be able to take more questions as the session is ending here. So just to wrap it up quickly, I would say that, as we would all agree, that today's discussion highlights that global trade is being rewritten through regional alliances, sustainability frameworks, and shifting investment strategies. The emerging trade order will likely depend on how effectively governments, businesses, and international institutions collaborate, particularly across key corridors connecting Europe, India, and the broader Indo-Pacific region. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anuj. Thank you, all the panelists.